When you look at Niger, Lynn powers France, literally. More than half of the energy, the electricity that France uses is based on nuclear energy, comes from nuclear energy. Nuclear energy, uranium. Niger has one of the largest deposits of uranium, not just in Africa, but in the world. So for the longest time, Niger has been powering France, literally. Take Niger away, take the uranium away, and those hot baths that you're taking in Paris, they might just be cold. Anytime a foreign nation must come into your country to intervene, you're not sovereign at all. So when we have all these cases of foreign armies on African soil in the name of bases, military bases, including Kenya, including Djibouti, we're not sovereign at all.
And conservancies.
Yeah, exactly. You see, like that speaks to the fact that the internal sovereignty is not there because we're not in control of certain sections of the country. Africa needs to have its own currency, Lynn. This business of 54 different currencies all over Africa, they make it easy for IMF, for World Bank, for USA, for Britain, and for these countries to just manipulate Africa. Africa must have its currency, man. If Africa has its own currency that is backed by Africa's vast mineral resources, I kid you not, it will be the most powerful currency in the world. Do you know, Lynn, that Francophone Africa has had more than 100 attempted coups over the last 5 decades, 6 decades. A few of those coups d'etats were popular revolutions. The people were behind it. But for the most of these coups d'etats, whether attempted or successful, it's actually France that was behind it. And the reason France was behind it was when they no longer liked a president, they would take him out. Samori Touré turned vast villages into gun and weapons manufacturing centers.
Wow.
Right here in Africa. Right here. Now, there's a second key right there. In 3 words, that key is made in Africa. Unless we make what we consume, unless we produce what we consume, they will always defeat us.
Yes.
We will always be beholden to them.
Yes.
Samori Touré proved for 18 long years, the French were unable to defeat him. Completely. Many of the corrupt ruling elite in Africa, the corrupt ruling elite globally, they would want the African to continue sleeping because an awakened African is the one who will take this world to the next level.
Hey guys, welcome to today's episode of LNN. My name is Lynn Ngugi, and as always, we get to meet and do the 3 things that we are doing this year, where we get to learn and relearn. And I'm very excited of our conversation today because I have always wondered, how does France continue ruling over Africa indirectly, and why do they have so much power on the African continent? And also, how can we be able to get out of some of these deals that African countries have signed with France? And I always say, is it our interest or is it their interest that they are protecting? And I'm happy that we get to be joined by an incredible gentleman here who we featured on our previous episode, and you guys loved it. I mean, the comments on that conversation is mind-boggling. I love that you guys are being active participants of these conversations, and I know that even every time we bring out one story, it presents an opportunity for us to be able to change our thoughts, learn and relearn. And now, of course, without further ado, please allow me to let my guest today introduce himself.
Great.
DJ, how are you?
I'm doing great, Lynn.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to see you again.
It's great to see you too.
Yeah, how are you
great
feeling?
Great to be here. Yeah, it's another beautiful day right here in Africa.
Yes.
Yeah.
How are you feeling?
I'm feeling so good because we're in the process of awakening our beloved Africa. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yes.
I appreciate you finding time to join us for another conversation. As I said when I was doing my intro, people really loved our first conversation together.
Great.
And I loved the feedback. I loved the awakening.
Yes.
I love that people are able to have these discussions and also ask, what's the way forward? So this is not something I take for granted.
Yeah.
But maybe in case someone missed that episode and they are catching you for the very first time, could you please introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Great.
Yeah.
My name's DJ Bokali. I'm an African currently living in Kenya. The reason I say that is because Africa must realize that we are one. We are one people, 1.5 billion of us, but we are one people. So the sooner we have it in our minds and in our mindsets that we are one people, the better. So I live currently here in Kenya, and it is great to be here. I am also a writer. The reason that I do a lot of writing is because I believe we have to tell the stories of Africa. We have to share the African narrative. Our voice must be amplified. It must be articulated. When we do so, we're going to keep awakening each other.
Yes. And again, thank you for being here. I think off camera, I was sharing with you something we did recently.
Yes.
We just uploaded a conversation on the history of Safari Rally.
Yes.
In the aim of us going back to our history, again, learning, unlearning, and relearning some of these things. And I see a couple of comments that make me wonder, should we stop talking about African issues? Because someone randomly will say, it's 60 years since you guys got independence, move on. The British came, what they actually did was help you, etc., etc. But my question to you is, number one, should we stop talking about our history? Should we continue talking about our history? And did we really get this independence that people keep telling us that you guys, you are not independent, etc., etc.?
Great question. And one thing I can say is that imagine if you have a virus. It's still in the early stages. It hasn't been taken out of your body. You can either decide to take it out, to go to the roots of this virus. Is it in your kidneys? Is it in your bloodstream? Where exactly is this virus? Unless you do that, this virus is going to keep growing. It can grow into a tumor maybe. This tumor could be cancerous. And one day, Lynn, this cancerous tumor will take you out unless you take it out. So Africa has a choice to make. We either go back to our roots, we either go back deep into our system, into our psyche, to take out the tumors that are there, to take out the viruses that are there. Because if we don't do that, they'll take us out. They're already taking us out. As we will see when we begin discussing this matter of France and the West, these tumors are extremely deadly. And unless you go back to history, for instance, the Safari Rally thing, if indeed it is true, which is the case, anybody can research about it, that the British used events like the Safari Rally, even religion, to actually colonize not just Africa, the African land, but the African mind, which is even more deadly. Now, if we don't go back to that, they will keep using other means, either similar means or different means, to continue colonizing our minds, to continue exploiting us. So by all means, we have to go back to our roots. And one of the things the African has to do is to go back to the roots, not for purposes of nostalgic romanticizing of our history, but so that we can be in touch with who we really are. Remember, Africa is the cradle of mankind. Africa is the cradle of mankind. That doesn't go against religion, because some people like to say that when you say that, it means that you are opposed to religion. We're not opposed to religion at all, but we have to be clear that Africa is where it all began. Yet, Africa today is the poorest continent. There has to be something amiss there, because we cannot be the cradle of mankind and at the same time
be the
poorest continent. So by all means, we have to keep going back to our history with contemporary lens, because when we do that, we learn from our mistakes and we don't repeat them. If we don't do that, we will keep repeating our mistakes and we'll keep digging deeper and deeper into this hole.
Do some of the politicians we have around, would they want us to go back to our history, or it's to their advantage if we completely assume our history?
Absolutely. Many of the corrupt ruling elite in Africa, the corrupt ruling elite globally, they would want the African to continue sleeping, because an awakened African is the one who will take this world to the next level. And taking the world to the next level means that, just like Ubuntu says that I am because we are, you and I are now brother and sister, it's like we've known each other forever, and it's a very African thing. Now, Ubuntu is what is in the heart and soul of Africa. An awakened African will begin to propagate this Ubuntu to other parts of the world, and that is about equity. That is about equality. The Western people like to imagine that they're the ones who brought this discussion of gender equality and gender equity. Has the US of A ever had a female president?
No.
They've never had one. Now, I don't say that to diss all the men who've been president there, but to show you that Africa is already the home of equity. Sometimes poverty makes us the world to perceive us as not having equity and equality. Because when there's rampant poverty, Lynn, it becomes about survival for the fittest. It's a human thing. That if there's only one cup here and you and I are dying of thirst, all of a sudden, there might start being some conflict between us. Because I've got to drink that water, you've got to drink that water. It's only one cup. It's extremely limited. So do not mistake the problems we see in Africa regarding sometimes matters equity, matters equality. Do not mistake that to mean that the African is essentially or inherently like that. There's a big difference between the African trying to survive and the African being the home of mankind and seeking to awaken so that this world can be a better place.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. So as we awaken, what is France still doing in Africa? Because I was looking at it, DJ, and I'm like, so many years after some of these countries received independence, majority of them, as you said, are poor. But France continues to dominate their economies. And I was like, how does this exactly happen? Can you break it down for us so we see where is this going? And is this for the benefit of the continent or the destruction of the continent?
Great question. And here's the thing. I want our viewers to know, I want everybody to know that we are going to go on a treasure hunt. We're going to search for 5 keys in this treasure hunt. 5 keys that will help Africa to unlock lasting and total triumph against France, against the West, and against all who are exploiting Africa. The reason I start with that is because Africa must awaken to a place where, as we point out what is wrong, we have to point out how to get out of that hole. We have to point out how to truly awaken. So I'm going to take everybody through a journey that begins from the 1870s, 1860s, because we need to understand the concept and the context of why France has been in Africa so long and why France continues to exploit Africa in a very clever manner. But at the end of it all, I'm going to share, or I'm going to suggest what I think is a lasting solution.
Beautiful.
Beyond these 5 keys that I'll talk about, I'm also going to explain why the person in your mirror, the one who looked back at you this morning, Lynn, that person, why she's the one who holds the ultimate key.
Wow.
It's very, very critical to understand that because we the people of Africa, are the ones who are the most powerful force in this world.
Great.
Now, in the year 2002, in Élysée Palace, that's the White House of France, that's where the president lives, Élysée Palace. In the year 2002, the president was Jacques Chirac, who was then the French president. In one of the rooms in Élysée Palace, let me say that this is absolutely true. I'm not trying to fictionalize or to dramatize this matter. What I'm saying is absolutely true. In one of the rooms in Élysée Palace, Jacques Chirac was there. And then some people arrived. Some people arrived from Burkina Faso. They were carrying drums, popular known globally as djembes, the djembe drums. Now, you may wonder, what were they doing there with these drums? Why were they going to see the French president with drums? The reason is not because they were going to entertain the French president, even though the Africa, we have the moves, we have the rhythm, but they were not there to share the African rhythm with Jacques Chirac. Rather, they were there to share money from Blaise Compaoré. Blaise Compaoré is a guy who colluded with France to kill our amazing and our beloved Thomas Sankara. Now, these guys were there. The reason the djembes were there, the drums, was because the money was hid in the drums.
Oh.
Yeah, the money was hid in the drums. So they ripped it open together with the aids of Jacques Chirac, and then they removed the currencies. They were in small denominations. Now, that is not bizarre. You know, to the viewer, it's going to appear very bizarre, but that was commonplace. That begins to explain the relationship between France and Africa. Blaise Compaoré was bringing money to Chirac. It's not the first time he was doing that. He's not the only Francophone African leader who used to do that. It was very common for Africans to bring funds to these French presidents or presidential candidates. All that, Lynn, was happening within what is known as Franafrique. Franafrique. Franafrique, picture this to understand what Franafrique is. Imagine a shadowy network of people who collude, people who reach out to each other to do evil, to do bad, to exploit, but very powerful people.
Yeah.
That's what Franafrique was. Now, Franafrique, which basically just means France and Africa. Franafrique, France, Afrique. Franafrique was actually coined by an African. It was coined by an African, the president of Ivory Coast, the first president of Ivory Coast, that's Cote d'Ivoire. He was a guy called Houphouët-Boigny. Houphouët-Boigny coined the term Franafrique. He didn't do so with an insidious or with an evil motive, but he did it to show how Africa wants to continue collaborating with France because they were still enamored and in love with France. And then a guy called Foccart, Jacques Foccart, who was like the Minister of Africa under Charles de Gaulle. Charles de Gaulle is one of the most famous French presidents. So when Africa was getting independence in the late 50s, early 60s, Charles de Gaulle was the president of France. Now his minister for Africa, including Madagascar, was a guy called Jacques Foccart. So what Jacques Foccart did, he realized that France has to be very smart in the way they are going to correlate and to relate with Africa. So he took that Franafrique that Houphouët-Boigny had coined, and then he turned it into one of the most secretive, one of the most exploitative, bilateral and multilateral networks the world has ever seen. Because it became about France actually controlling Africa through this shadowy network. Now, I'm going to show you how exactly Franafrique explained, but worked. But that scene that I started with, now that's Franafrique. Because it was not in the media, it was not in the headlines that Blaise Compaoré gives millions of shillings or of dollars to Chirac, because this was secretive. What does Blaise Compaoré get in return? Now, this is what Franafrique was all about. It was both a symbiotic relationship and a parasitic relationship between France and Africa. It was symbiotic in the sense that these leaders were benefiting from France keeping them in power. France ensuring that they protect them. And France was benefiting from the resources of Africa. France was benefiting by continuing to control Africa. So that's the starting point.
So how exactly do these African politicians get protected by the France, Is it through army? Is it through weapons? What is this traitor getting in return?
Great question. Great question. And again, we have to dig into history so that we understand the present.
Okay.
It's so important for people to understand how this relationship between France and Africa is absolutely messed up, because it is an extension of the relationship between the West and Africa, and now even between China and Africa. And you see, because we've not been able to deal with the France situation, no wonder even China now is exploiting us. No wonder these other global powers, including a country like Turkey, which is starting to do some good, yes, but there's also a measure of exploitation. So we have to solve the France puzzle. We have to get out of this France morass, this France mess, so that can help us to also deal with the other areas that are really messing us up.
Yes.
Now, here's the thing. Do you know, Lynn, that Francophone Africa has had more than 100 attempted coups over the last 5 decades, 5, 6 decades. A few of those coups d'etats were popular revolutions. The people were behind it. But for the most of these coups d'etats, whether attempted or successful, it's actually France that was behind it. And the reason France was behind it was when they no longer liked a president, they would take him out. For example, I am actually going to share the histories and the life stories of about 10 or so Francophone presidents, because hid in their stories are these 5 keys that I was talking about, that Africa needs to actually come up with. That's the treasure hunt. We've got to look at the lives of these 10 or so presidents from Francophone Africa to truly understand what went wrong and how we can correct it. The first one will give you a direct answer, and this one is super, super tragic. The first president of Togo was an amazing guy called Sylvanus Olympio. Sylvanus Olympio was one of the brightest, most intellectual presidents, not just in Africa, but across the world. Now, Sylvanus Olympio, unlike many of the other presidents, the founding presidents of many other African countries, he believed in sovereignty. He believed that Togo should not be a puppet of France or any other Western nation. So Sylvanus Olympio made it clear that he will do everything in his power to ensure that France does not control Togo. He made that crystal clear. And for 3 years, he was doing his best. And then he committed the cardinal sin, the kind of sin that to date, both the West and France and World Bank and IMF does not want Africa to do, which is why Africa hasn't yet committed what to them is a cardinal sin, but what to us, it's our passkey, it's our password to where we need to be. Sylvanus Olympio, what he did is this. He said that he was going to take Togo out of CFA. He was going to come up with an independent Togolese currency that is not pegged on the CFA, which is an extension of the French central bank, because the reserve is in the French central bank. So he said that, and he even said, because he understood that you cannot just walk away with your currency, you need a proper fiscal plan or your people will suffer. So Sylvanus Olympio was ready to have the Deutschmark, which at the time was a German currency, to actually back the new Togolese franc that he was envisioning. You see, that was very powerful because it meant that Togo, a tiny country in Western Africa, was going to walk away from the stranglehold, the fiscal, the monetary stranglehold of France. Because he understood that if you have your hand in my pocket, Lynn, you've got to follow me wherever I go. So he said Togo is not going to put up with that at all. Now, here's what happened. When Sylvanus Olympio did that, a few days later he was dead.
Wow.
Again, as I always say, people should research these things for themselves so that they can understand it's not about some of us coming here to speak what others might think are conspiracy theories. A few days later, Sylvanus Olympio was dead. In his place, after some time, was the president who then ruled Togo for a long, long, long time. A guy called Eyadema Kasinbe. He went ahead to rule Togo for a very, very long time. And you see in that case, because Sylvanus Olympio rebelled against France, they took him out, colluding with the local people right there in Togo. And that is where Franafrique comes in. Because in this shadowy network, they realized, wait a minute, we have most presidents, but 2 or 3 are rebelling in the early 60s. What do we do about that? These are things that cannot be discussed at the UN. These are things that cannot be discussed in bilateral diplomatic sessions. So now this is why this shadowy network called Franafrique came in very, very handy. Because through that, they could make these decisions and say, we're not going to protect this one, so we'll take him out. You see, Togo has never recovered to date. It has never recovered. Togo holds a special place in my heart because about 10, 15 years ago, myself and somebody from Togo called Sena Aluka, we founded the Africa Youth Initiative on Climate Change, actually 15 years ago, still a youth then. So we founded the Africa Youth Initiative on Climate Change. And I remember this Sena Aluka as somebody that I almost found him to be, echoing their first president. Because just like their first president, Olympio, he was also, still is charismatic, somebody who believes in a united Africa. So I said with him, I told him, my brother Sena, what can we do to continue uniting Africa? And at the time, because I was still working at the United Nations Environment Program, we were able to found this Pan-African Initiative on Climate Change. It's still in existence, even though there's a lot to decode on this whole climate change thing, because there's a lot of issues that have to be addressed and tackled there. But that is why Togo has that place in my heart, because of that personal touch with Sena Luka and a lot of other Togolese people. Now, once they took out this first president, and this after a while, this dictator took over, his son, a guy called Foch, is the current president of Togo. Still the same story. So you see, Togo is still suffering the consequences of what France did when they took out Olympio. Let's dream for a while. Let's dream for a while and ask ourselves the question, what if France hadn't taken out Olympio?
What would Togo be like?
What would Togo be like? Number one, they would have had their own currency. This currency would have shown the other Francophone countries what is possible when you begin building your own fiscal sovereignty. And who is to say what that would have led to? Who is to say the domino effect that would have had? So you see, because something like that happened arguably a long time ago, unless we dig it up like I'm now doing, then it's easy for people to imagine that you people, why do you keep talking about France? Because that is something that has to be corrected. And actually today in this show, I'm actually calling for the international community to rise up and institute a proper commission of inquiry so that we can get to understand how indeed France was involved in the assassination of Olympio. We cannot let it rest. We cannot let these things rest because they keep getting away with such things, France and USA and a couple of other countries. Now, I need to now take you back to another president. Remember, for Sylvanus Olympio, there's that powerful thing that he wanted to do
for his country,
which was to have a Togolese currency. Actually, before I move away from him, let me actually share what Africa can learn. Therein lies the first key. Remember, there are 5 keys. The first key is Africa needs to have the Afro. What is the Afro? The Afro is Africa's version of the euro. Africa needs to have its own currency, Lynn. This business of 54 different currencies all over Africa, they make it easy for IMF, for World Bank, for USA, for Britain, and for these countries to just manipulate Africa. Africa must have its currency, man. It's not rocket science. It's absolutely not rocket science. If Africa has its own currency that is backed by Africa's vast mineral resources, I kid you not, it will be the most powerful currency in the world. Because currently, the dollar is not backed by anything. It's just backed by, it's called fiat currency. It's just backed by the US government promise.
And not the resources, not whatever.
Exactly.
Just,
Yeah. And that happened in 1972 when Richard Nixon made a unilateral decision to take the dollar away from the gold backing that had been there for all that time. So the dollar is actually a very weak currency that is masquerading as a strong currency because it is the de facto global currency. If there was the Afro, an African currency backed by Africa's mineral resources, we have vast amounts of gold, vast amounts of diamond. I kid you not, that would be the strongest currency in the world, and it would lift up Africa. It would lift up Africans. We owe it to Sylvanus Olympio to actually finish what he started.
I'm in agreement.
Yeah.
I'm in agreement. What makes it so hard for Africa not to have its own currency?
In one word, it is CRE. CRE is a corrupt ruling elite. Because the corrupt ruling elite of Africa realize that if Africa has a singular currency, the Africans will be enriched, the Africans will benefit, and they will have no rooms to play shenanigans. You know, for example, how in Kenya, the moment one becomes a politician, a governor, or the president, you know, we all know that the quickest way to become rich in Africa, including Kenya, is to become a politician. We all know that.
True story.
You see. Now, if there was the Afro currency, that will be much more difficult because we're talking about a centralized currency that has better checks and balances that you cannot just take and stash away. You know, you can't do that. However, even beyond the corrupt ruling elite that make it very difficult for this to happen, it is now the global ruling elite that would do anything and everything to ensure it doesn't happen. Now, I understand why some Africans are infatuated with Donald Trump. I understand why some people look at him as a breath of fresh air. But Donald Trump was very vocal in saying that the BRICS countries that are seeking to come up with a BRIC currency, if they ever dare to do that, they will face America's wrath. And that is just a BRIC currency. Now, think of how he would go bananas. Think of how all these leaders in the West would go bananas if Africa is then saying, forget about the BRIC currency, we want the Afro currency. You see, that's what Sylvanus Olympio, and that is why we need to go back to our history, because now we can pick that from him. We can also pick the Afro currency from Mali. Now I'm going to the second country.
Yes.
The founding president of Mali was a guy called Modibo Keita. Modibo Keita was a tall, dark, powerful, very genial fellow. Just a happy guy. You know, he embodied the happy spirit that exists in plenty here in Africa. I think it's most abundantly found here in Africa.
In us.
Yeah. In spite of what we're going through,
Yes.
we're just happy people, man. So Modibo Keita exemplified that. Within 2 years of Mali getting independence, Modibo Keita also said, we're not going to use the CFA. So he started the Malian franc. He actually started the Malian franc. But France did something different with him than what they did with Sylvanus Olympio. France said, okay, we will let you be. France began what is called the war of attrition. They did everything in their power diplomatically to ensure that Mali was starved of the support it needed globally as a young African country. And then behind the scenes, remember, picture a dark room full of mostly men with evil intentions, men from both France and Africa. But in this dark room, it is the French holding the remote control, pulling the strings that are controlling the puppets. Now, once you picture that, you'll begin to understand how they see Modibo Keita is beginning to awaken Mali. Modibo Keita has a Malian franc that is actually beginning to pick up, because for Sylvanus Olympio, it had not yet picked up. It was still an intention. Then they took him out. For this one, they let it be. And then they began to starve Mali. And then they did what France is very notorious for doing. About 6-7 years into his presidency, there was a coup d'etat. And he was taken out. Now, 40 coup d'etats have been successful in Francophone Africa. More than 40 have been successful. The vast majority of those were successful because of the French backing. Of course, the recent ones like in Burkina Faso, in Niger, those ones were not backed by the French, and it's why they are very furious. But this one that took out Modibo Keita, it was actually backed by the French, and then they continued ensuring that Mali does not even get up. After they took him out, now they had a puppet in place, a puppet that they could use to just maintain the status quo. Then tragically, in 1984, Mali limped back to CFA. because the Malian franc was completely starved. You know, it wasn't working. So they realized that they have to limp back to CFA.
Yes.
So France's war of attrition had actually won in that particular scenario. Now, if you don't go back to that history, you will not understand what could have been done differently for the Malian franc to work. The Afro currency that we are agitating for will be able to learn from the lessons of Mali. This is not a pipe dream. This is something that can happen. We need to look at Mali and ask ourselves what could have been done differently there. We need to go back to Olympio and understand, in wanting to back the currency, the Togolese currency with the Deutschmark, now we are saying that we do not want to back our currency with any of these things. We are saying that we want to back the Afro currency with Africa's immeasurable, timeless mineral resources. And we owe it to Modibo Keita, we owe it to Sylvanus Olympio to actually walk that path.
Good.
Yeah.
First key unlocked.
Yep.
Part of the solution.
Second key.
Incoming.
Now, for the second key, I will take you back to 1884. Berlin Conference has taken place.
Yeah.
France is feeling emboldened.
Yes.
Because France has been given, most of West Africa, most of Central Africa.
And when we say they were given, it's like you were just peanuts being distributed left, right. Nothing pisses me off, man.
Crazy.
So they were given. Take. Sorry, go on.
Exactly. So France now is keen on going to take what is rightfully theirs, as per the conference in Berlin. Now, shock on France, whereas many of those countries, they are pretty much giving in because of France's military power. And then the African countries as we know them today still did not exist. They existed in terms of their own traditional boundaries and what have you. Now, France was just colluding with a lot of the then corrupt ruling elite to come and take over a place. But shock on them, in the region, in the far west part of Africa, there was a guy there called Samori Touré.
Yes.
Yeah, there was Samori Touré there. And this guy was not going to have any of that. Samori Touré, first of all, let's have his brief history.
Yes, please.
Yeah, Samori Touré's mother was captured. In traditional Africa, one of the things that really messed up Africa, we've got to have this conversation someday soon, is a transatlantic slave trade. Because the transatlantic slave trade provided a market for slaves.
Yes.
And in providing a market, it started to pit Africans against each other. Where my community can come to your community to fight you, knowing that once we defeat you, we're going to sell you guys in this transatlantic slave trade. If the demand wasn't there, because some people like saying that you Africans were still selling each other anyway, but if the demand wasn't there, there would be nobody to sell slaves to. Even that concept wouldn't have been there. So it so happened that his mama was captured. This is 1760, 1770. No, 18. 1870s there. So his mama was captured as a slave. And Modibo Keita said he went and volunteered himself to the role of that particular community and said, I'm going to work for you to earn my mother's slavery.
Not Modibo.
Samori. Exactly. Yeah. Samori Touré, he said, I'm going to work for you.
To get my mom back.
To get my mom back. And he was such a good leader, such a good worker, that after he earned his mother's freedom, he realized that he needed to unite his people, the Mandinka, the Mandinka people in Western Africa. So he began to gradually unite those people, unite them. And then he formed what is now known as the Wasulu Empire. Literally with his bare hands. When I say that African men must learn to work with our bare hands to craft triumph and to craft success, to craft a new Africa, we can learn from Samori Touré.
Yes.
We can definitely learn, because he created an empire from scratch. It didn't exist before him. But he was able to create this empire from scratch. And then the French came calling, because now they want to have, that part of Africa. It belongs to them, or so they think. But he didn't have any of that. When he realized that fighting the French with traditional African weaponry was leading to defeat, he simply recouped and began to learn what do they use to defeat us. When he realized it was about rifles and modern weaponry, ammunition, guns, he decided that we are going to make these weapons ourselves.
With our hands.
Not to import them, but to make them.
Yes.
Literally.
And defend.
Yeah, and defend our land. So what did he do? He leveraged, there's what is known as indigenous knowledge systems. All of Africa, wherever you go, there's indigenous knowledge that has now been swept aside because of the Western education that trumped African knowledge and African education as something unworthy of civilization.
Yeah.
But Samori Touré was able to lean on the blacksmiths of the Mandinka, of the now Wasulu Empire, to actually make guns. So they began to make guns. He sent spies to go to France to learn how they do these things. Then they began to make guns themselves. Samori Touré turned vast villages into gun and weapons manufacturing centers. Right here in Africa, right here. Now, there's a second key right there. In 3 words, that key is made in Africa. Made in Africa. Because unless we make what we consume, unless we produce what we consume, they will always defeat us.
Yes.
We will always be beholden to them.
Yes.
Samori Touré proved for 18 long years the French were unable to defeat him completely. In fact, something very tragic happened, which began now to lead to his eventual weakness. The French had already started controlling Senegal at the time. So the French conscripted Senegalese soldiers, some against their will, but some thought it was a noble thing to do, to help them to fight Samori Touré and the Wasulu Empire. So this became so big, this onslaught from the French, that what then happened is that this guy Samori Touré, strategist that he was, awesome leader that he was, he actually did something that has never been done before. He told his people, we are going to shift. Africa belongs to us.
Yes.
Africa belongs to all of us. So we are going to move away from this bit of this western part of Africa. We're going to go further east to make it harder for the French to defeat us. He didn't give in completely. So they moved to what is now Cote d'Ivoire, to that bit. Remember, this is just 150 years or so ago. It's not even that far back. So picture tens of thousands of people moving in mass because they are not going to give in. They are not going to capitulate, to surrender to the French. So they moved to a bit of what is now known as Cote d'Ivoire, and there was a forest nearby. So it was all the more difficult for the French to defeat him.
Yeah.
However, they pulled that. That's when they began to perfect the war of attrition. Because they had moved that far, they were no longer able to make their weaponry themselves properly because of logistical issues. They needed food in this new land. So the French just decided to let him starve, They decided we have time on our side. We're going to make it difficult for him. So eventually in 1898, unfortunately, because of this war of attrition, the French then captured Samori Touré. And then in 1900, he passed on, but of natural sickness. They never even killed him, you see. But the story of Samori Touré must be told in every African classroom. The fact that it is not shows that we need to decolonize our education.
Absolutely.
You see?
Absolutely.
Because we read about Alexander the Great. We read about all these people. But very few Africans know about Samori Touré. Yet, he exemplifies and personifies made in Africa. Why is that the second key, and why is it very, very important? If you drove here today, as I did, For me, I was driving a Japanese car. Which one are you driving? German car. Yeah. Now, none of us was driving a Togolese car.
Yours is what again? Oh boy!
None of us was driving a Cameroonian car.
No,
or a Kenyan car.
Not even a Ghanaian.
Yeah. Yet you and I are avowed Pan-Africanists, eh? Like strong believers in this beloved Mama Africa, yeah?
Damn it.
You see, in fact, we say proudly,
yes.
German machine. I saw the way you said yours, eh?
For sure. I'm not even sure.
You're like, you're still in Japan, man. You see.
This show is over, guys.
Yeah. So, you see how even you and I, we are still not practicing what Samori Touré did, made in Africa. President Moi had many, many evil things and bad things about him, but I understand, I've been made to believe that at least he tried to come up with a Kenyan car that never saw the light of the day anyway, but the intention seems to have been there. Now, our call to all the African presidents, our call to all the investors, our call to Aliko Dangote, if you're going to watch this Aliko Dangote, Africa must start producing their own cars. Hey. As long as we continue driving German cars and Japanese cars, we keep exporting jobs to those countries. We keep exporting, jobs that are needed right here to those countries. We keep disempowering ourselves, so to speak. Samori Touré teaches us that made in Africa is what will conquer these people. Because made in Africa helped him to conquer the French. As far as I'm concerned, he conquered the French. He died of natural causes. Yes, they ended up capturing him, but they did not take away his land from him through some sort of collusion. He defended his land to the last breath. He did so because of made in Africa. Wow. Today's Africa must begin to produce our own things right here. We must produce our own cars right here. I challenge all the young people, engineers, and don't just say that you're a Pan-Africanist. Don't just say that ours is a different generation. If you're an engineer, ask yourself, what does it take to make a car anyway? I'm sure your mechanic, just like my mechanic, they understand every single inch of these cars. They understand how everything there moves. Literally, we have the brains, we have the knowledge. There's absolutely nothing stopping us from making our own cars. We now need a race right here in Africa to see which country will be the first to make their own car from A to Z. Because once they do that, we are going to buy that car.
Yeah, instead of giving us the motherboard we assemble here,
exactly.
Then they try to say
exactly.
This is made in...
This is especially South Africa
yes.
and Morocco. They are producing a lot of cars, but it's about assembling. We have to produce these things from A to Z. We've got to be able to do this.
Wow, powerful key right there.
If we don't do that, then we shall not be learning Samori Touré's lesson. And therein also lies what we shall do with France. Because France has messed us up all this time, as I'll continue showing. But the more we make our own things, the less we will need them.
Yes.
This is a goal, Lynn. This is exactly where we're headed. When you are coming to work today, did you meet an ant? But there were thousands of ants, even right here, even here.
Yes.
They're so tiny, they're big ants, they're small ants. Now for the tiny ants, unless you're using a microscope all the time, you cannot even know it's there.
Yes.
That's how insignificant it is. Yes, and a small ant is important in the broader ecosystem because every living organism is important in the ecosystem. But in terms of your happiness or lack thereof, it is insignificant. You don't even know it's there. That's where France should be. France should become insignificant to Africa.
Yes.
Completely insignificant.
Yes.
But it will not become insignificant if we have to continue buying their cars.
Oh, I'm calling Macron. I was on a call with Macron.
Yeah. They have to become insignificant.
Yeah.
And Samori Touré shows us that the more we uphold made in Africa in everything, literally everything. Why is it that even our food, we don't have food sovereignty? When there's a battle, when there's a war between Russia and Ukraine, all of a sudden the wheat flour is much more expensive because Africa imports a lot of wheat from there.
Yes.
Yet right here in Africa, we can actually plant all these things. Samori Touré teaches us, let us plant what we consume. Let us eat what we have planted.
Yes.
Right here in Africa. So that was the second key. And before I move on from Samori Touré, I urge Africa's educational curriculum experts. You've got to introduce Samori Touré into your curriculum as an African figure that should be studied and emulated.
Beautiful.
Now, we'll move on to the second bit. Samori Touré had a great grandson who then rose up. They thought they took him down, but they didn't, because he came back through his grandson. The grandson is a guy called Sékou Touré. He may not be a direct grandson, but they're from the same lineage.
Yes.
Now, Sékou Touré was one of the most consequential leaders. He was the first president of Guinea. And again, we're going to learn from the Guinea experience and Sékou Touré's experience about what more we need to do. Sékou Touré said extremely powerful words. Sékou Touré said, nous préférons la liberté dans la pauvreté à la richesse dans l'esclavage. Repeat after me.
DJ, what you doing to me today? You know, pauvreté, but I had pauvreté.
Yeah.
Yes.
What it means, Lynn, is that we prefer liberty in poverty to riches in slavery.
Wow.
We prefer liberty
in poverty to riches in slavery.
And you know, I say that. He said that because in 1958, Guinea became the first former French colony to become independent. And at that time, Charles de Gaulle, celebrated globally as a hero, but to Africa, there's another side of it. Charles de Gaulle and France said that they're going to have an election so that all their former colonies can vote on whether they'll be part of the French African community or not. Because what France wanted to do, and they've been super successful in that, is yes, we're going to tell you that you're independent, but they wanted these countries to formally be part of the French African community so that the party can continue. There can be a semblance of independence, but formally the party can continue.
Yes.
You see. Now, Sékou Touré, that's why he said those words. He then voted no. Guinea was the only country to vote no. He said that we're not going to be part of that BS. We're just not going to be part of that. Now, France was furious, completely furious, so furious that they totally began to sabotage Guinea. They left en masse, which is fine. But as they left the country, they were doing petty things like pouring cement into toilets so that the drainage systems can be blocked, because they couldn't believe, who the hell do you think you are to actually tell us no? They couldn't believe that. That's why to date they do not like it when anybody does that. That's why they don't like it when Ibrahim Traoré says that, who the hell do you think you are?
Yes.
You know, he says it back to them.
Yes.
The same way Sékou Touré said it to them.
Yeah.
We are independent,
Who
you know.
do you think?
Yeah, we are not going to be part of this French West African community. Now, they played the same game, war of attrition. They continued ensuring that Guinea was ostracized, Guinea was marginalized. The good thing is that Sékou Touré lived until 1984. He died of natural causes. But by the time he died, now he had become what some might say a realist in the sense that much as his relationship with France thankfully never healed, but now he began to look at America as a potential ally. He went and met Ronald Reagan because of survival.
Yeah.
Because of survival. because he realized that his country, it was now the 80s, and his country had been marginalized for too long. There was a lot of poverty, and people were suffering a lot. So he was like, okay, maybe I'll dance with the US.
Yes.
That's going to help my people. He fell sick in Saudi Arabia. He was rushed to the US. Then he died in the US, actually. But Sekou Touré in the early 60s showed Africa how we need to treat these people. The third key that he showed us is a fighting spirit.
Oh.
It's a fighting spirit where he was like, if I'll be the only one left standing, so be it. So be it. However, before I expand a little bit on that key,
Yes.
let me also say how they defeat us. When he did that, the Western media began branding him as a dictator, as they usually do, as somebody who is messing up his people. Poverty began increasing in Guinea. Poverty began increasing, unemployment started soaring.
Yeah.
He then started flirting with the Soviets, and that was at the height of the Cold War. So this led even to much more marginalization. And flirting with the Soviets, you know, getting into bed with the Soviets, did not necessarily translate to financial prosperity for his country, which is the same today. We'll need to briefly talk about the Soviets, the Russians rather, in Burkina Faso, because it's the same issue where it is not also translating to financial success in Burkina Faso, even though, of course, they are much better. You cannot compare them to the West.
Yes.
But back to this guy, what then happened is that it became a game of survival because he's being threatened from all sides. So unfortunately, his regime became a little bit repressive. People started disappearing. You know, people who were being sponsored by the West to attack him locally would sometimes disappear or be imprisoned for long because now he was in survival mode. You know, there was a bit of paranoia, but you see that was a game that the West was playing.
Yes.
To ensure that they used the war of attrition to wear him down, turn him into a very, very bad guy, you see. So that seems to have worked. Eventually, to date, Guinea has never recovered. Just like Togo, Guinea has never recovered. Even though in Guinea he stood up, but they still used the war of attrition to ostracize him, to marginalize him, so much so that Guinea is still performing far below its amazing potential. But that fighting spirit is something that Africans must now deploy to create the Afro, an all-Africa currency, to ensure there's real sovereignty in this continent.
Yes.
We cannot give up. The fighting spirit must endure. Sekou Touré showed us, we must today say that if it means that you and I, after 5 years, will start walking to work or walking to wherever we're going, to make a statement that Kenya needs to produce its cars, Africa needs to produce its cars,
We'll do that.
then
We must.
yeah, we must reach that level because that's exactly what it did. So we owe it to Sekou Touré, especially the 60s Sekou Touré, the early 60s, who truly inspired a generation. We owe it to him to ensure that we recapture the fighting spirit that will take Africa to the next level.
Good.
Now, this takes me to the fourth key. We still have a couple of presidents to look at.
Yes.
The farthest western part of Africa is Mauritania. One of the farthest parts, right, is Mauritania, Senegal, that bit there. Now, Mauritania is a massive country, and Mauritania, their founding president was a guy called Mokhtar Dada. Mokhtar Dada.
Yeah.
I think there's Mokhtar Dada Street somewhere in Kenya. It
Yes.
is named after him.
Yeah.
So this guy, Mokhtar Dada, he had his issues, but in 1971, he showed us the fourth key. In 1971, at the UN General Assembly, he gave one of the most powerful speeches ever. He castigated NATO when NATO was almost untouchable because it was 20 or so years after the Second World War. So NATO was still like, you know, this prince of light that was fighting evil. But he castigated NATO very powerfully at the United Nations. The reason it did so was because NATO was supporting Portugal. Now, guess what Portugal was doing in the early 70s, late 60s? It was terrorizing innocent Africans in Mozambique, innocent Africans in Cabo Verde, and in Guinea-Bissau, because those are former Portugal colonies.
Yes.
At that time, that is when the great Amilcar Cabral, the leader of the independence movement in Cabo Verde and Guinea-Bissau, was really fighting for independence. And Portugal was fighting them. And NATO was supporting Portugal. You see, this is how these people, by extension, have also messed up Africa. But then they hide behind organizations like NATO.
Yes.
Now, Mokhtar Dada lashed out. He spoke out very powerfully and eloquently about what was happening. And it began, for the first time, showing the other side of NATO, showing the other side of these colonialists. Because until that point, NATO was, was not in Africa, was not terrorizing anybody, was not colonizing anybody. But after that speech, it became clear that NATO is also as bad as the bad guys next door. Because why would they support Portugal? By extension, terrorize these amazing African countries? So what is the fourth key there, Lynn?
Yeah.
We must speak out. We must end the silence. We must end the silence. Africans must be able to speak out forcefully, consistently, systematically, strategically. We have to spotlight all this injustice that is going on in the world that continues to exploit the African to date. Injustices like the dollar completely messing up all African currencies because we have to pay our debts in dollar. I mean, how now? Why should we have to pay our debts?
I think we were going to Rwanda and we stopped at the JKI airport. There's a restaurant there.
Yeah.
We were grabbing something at the airport and they brought in the bill in dollars and they said, here you have to pay in dollars. And you look at them and you ask them why. It's because once you're in an airport, you are not in your land. But you look at them and you wonder, when you go to Qatar, in their restaurants, they have the dollar option, their local currency option.
Exactly.
But JKIA, there's a restaurant.
You have to pay in the dollar.
You have to pay in dollars.
Yeah, it's
in JKIA, not Kenya shillings,
in Kenya.
Because the airport is in Kenya, but you have to pay in dollars.
That's unacceptable.
That is totally unacceptable. That is unacceptable. So when you say we must end this dollar dominance, even in our own, and this is an African telling you, you have to pay in dollars. You ask them, why do I gotta pay in dollars? Because once you enter an airport, now you are no longer in Kenya, and here they only accept dollars.
No, that is injustice, and we have to follow the example of Mokhtar Dada. We have to embrace this fourth key of speaking out.
Yes.
We have to spotlight. The dollar is one of the greatest injustices in Africa today because of exactly what you said. The dollar compromises our sovereignty. The dollar compromises our ability to continue meeting the needs of our people. That is why the dollar must end. That is why the 54 heads of state in Africa must begin conversations on coming up with an all-Africa currency. I'm calling it the Afro. A lot of people are calling it that.
Yes.
It must happen. Because if it doesn't happen, this injustice will continue. Which is why we're calling out on every African of goodwill to speak out. Speak out about the injustices that continue because of the global exploitation.
Yes.
And as we do so, we're also pointing out solutions. We're no longer just speaking out about the injustice, but we're saying, how do we get out of that?
Yes.
So it is very, very critical. Let us remember Mokhtar Dada for that 1971 speech. And following that example, any African or any friend of Africa, for example, who climbs Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Kenya, even up there, speak out. Scream out from the rooftops, from the mountaintops. Let it be clear about these injustices. We cannot normalize them. Another injustice in that spirit of speaking out that continues to date is you cannot have a situation where all these conflicts in Africa all that weaponry is purchased from all these countries, from the USA, even from Russia, from China. You know, they're the ones that the bad guys in Africa buy weapons from. Such injustices, Africa must speak out.
Must speak out.
And it is because of that that your show is really doing an amazing job, because by providing a platform for people to speak out about these matters, then we're doing exactly what Mokta Dada did. It may not be at the United Nations General Assembly, but this is even more powerful because it's reaching even more people.
Yes.
See?
Thank you.
Then now, when you move from Mauritania, on the east of Mauritania, you have Mali. Then on the east of Mali, you have Niger. And then you have Chad. I'll still talk about the presidents of Chad and Niger, both then and now. But the reason I mentioned those 4 countries, do you know, Lynn, that those 4 countries, Mauritania, Mali, Niger, and Chad, those 4 countries alone are twice as big as USA. Yeah. Those 4 countries are twice as big as mainland USA. Leave alone Alaska. I know it's part of USA, but when you're looking at mainland USA, 4 African countries are almost twice as big as the entire USA. The reason I mention that is this. Africa must realize that we must make our land count for Africans. We must make our land count for Africans.
Yes.
We still have 60% of the world's arable land, yet we continue to import food. It's unacceptable. That's an injustice. It has to end. So when we look at those 4 countries, let us also celebrate the fact that their sheer size, America has got nothing on those 4 countries.
Wow.
Absolutely nothing. America continues to look really, really big because of the skewed maps, actually. Yeah, we need African cartographers need to come up with proper, accurate map that depicts the rightful place of Africa geographically. Because the sheer size of Africa has been literally dwarfed in the maps, so that psychologically we continue looking at ourselves as small people. But from today, let Africans realize, anytime the American system or the American officials misbehave, just tell them, you guys are not even half as big as 4 African countries. Of course, they'll tell us, what are you doing with your country?
Yeah.
That's exactly the awakening that now we're talking about. Now, we've already talked about Mauritania, Mokta Dada.
Yes.
We've talked about Mali. Remember Mali?
Yes.
This is where Modibo Keita, you know, the guy who tried to start the Malian franc. We've talked about that. Now, let's go to Niger.
Yeah.
When you look at Niger, Lynn powers France, literally powers France, because more than half of the energy, the electricity that France uses is based on nuclear energy. It comes from nuclear energy. Nuclear energy, uranium. You know, there's no nuclear energy without that uranium in this context. Now, Niger has one of the largest deposits of uranium, not just in Africa, but in the world. So for the longest time, Niger has been powering France, literally. Take Niger away, take the uranium away, and those hot baths that you're taking in Paris, they might just be cold. Now, the first president of Niger was a guy called Diori. He was a guy called Diori. There was almost a coup d'etat in 1963 or 64, but France helped him to bounce back because they needed him. The Franafrique was at play fully. You know, he was compliant. Some of the local soldiers did not like him because he was not responsive to the needs of the Nigerian people, but more to the needs of the French people. So some of the local soldiers revolted, but France came in to protect him because he's the guy, you know, he's their puppet.
Yes.
So they simply pull the strings and ensure that he survived, so that they can continue tapping into that uranium at throwaway prices. They are benefiting from the energy, from the electricity, but the people of Niger are not benefiting. To date, Niger has one of the lowest electricity connectivity in Africa and in the world. Now, that's a kind of injustice that we have to speak out about.
And they power France.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how twisted this whole thing has been for so long. But now Chane, the current president, he's trying his best. The damage stretches over so many decades, though, that it will still take a while to actually change the trajectory of Niger. So what we then learn from this guy is this. After France protected him, a couple of years down the road, now there's a successful coup d'etat because he was no longer useful to France. They have perfected the art of using and dumping. When they realized that he was becoming extremely unpopular in Niger, they simply said, okay, we replace him with another guy, who will still be our puppet, but the public will think that now we have a new leader. You see? So that's really, really tragic. And Africa must learn from the example of Diori, President Diori, the first president of Niger, that the West will simply use and dump you. The West is preoccupied by their own national interests. And when you're looking at the geopolitical chessboard, all countries, they are more so the militarily and financially powerful countries. They always treat other countries as pawns, most of the African countries. And that is very, very clear when you look at Diori, when you look at what happened to him. When he's no longer serving their interests, dump him, bring in another guy, but continue mining the uranium, continue powering France. Meanwhile, occasionally they'll give Niger a couple of million euros, but back then francs, a couple of million francs. They'll tell Niger, we are giving you aid, we're supporting your budget. Yet, in reality, it is Niger that was supporting France.
Yes.
So Africa must have a clearer perspective of the fact that for too long, it is Africa that has actually been supporting the West. Then they give us back either aid or the so-called loans, which we are saying that Africa should simply not pay any more loans. But African people themselves must be the one to find a systematic way of auditing these debts so that we begin to ensure that as we stop paying these debts, we do not want our corrupt ruling elite to still steal our money that we are saving because we are not paying the debts. Anyway, that was a detour. So back to Niger, we must be able to now use Niger's uranium in today's Africa to benefit the people of Niger and the people of Africa. Not a single household in Africa should be without electricity, because electricity will then power small-scale industries, cottage industries, and Niger holds the key to that. So we've got to learn from that. Now, when you move from Niger, go further east, now you have Chad. Chad, to date, continues having a lot of conflict, thanks to this age-old interference from France, thanks to this Franafrique that I talked about, this shadowy network, started under Charles de Gaulle, under Jacques Foccart, the Minister of Africa, under Charles de Gaulle, and a subsequent French president. So you find that even in today's Chad, there's still a lot of conflict. But there's something to learn from their first president. Therein is another key also. There's something very powerful to learn from their first president. He was a guy called Francois Tumbalbaye. Francois Tumbalbaye was a black guy. Chad has, the southern part of Chad, they are ethnically African, ethnically black, like you and I. But the higher part, the northern part of Chad, they are ethnically Arab. So what has been happening in Chad is that when you have a president from the south, if there's a coup, now there'll be another president from the north. It's been a ping pong for some time. So the first president, this Francois Tumbalbaye, was actually ethnically African. Now, there isn't much to write home about Francois Tumbalbaye, but there's something he attempted to do. He had a horrible execution of that, but Africa can learn something from that. Francois Tumbalbaye started, he rolled out an initiative that he was calling Chaditude. Chaditude. It was all about ensuring that they go back to their roots, that they celebrate their culture. He even went as far as saying that everybody needs to get rid of the European names. So even him, he gave up the name Francois. He came up with another name. I think it's Ngarta. So the spirit behind it was good because it was about celebrating the essence of who we are. It's about celebrating our Africanness. it's about realizing that our culture as Africans is not second class. So he attempted to do that. Unfortunately, he was also a puppet of France, like many of those early presidents. He was also a victim of this Franafrique. He also realized that he needed France to prop him up so that he continues wielding power. But I want us to focus on that Chaditude because it is closely linked to something that happened in Senegal at bigger, more intellectual proportions. It didn't go as far as telling people, change your name. You know, Francois Tumbalbaye even used to insist that, you know, some African communities, you know, you have these incision marks on the face. So his community was like that. And he was insisting that everybody in Chad should actually do that. So I applaud the spirit behind it of celebrating who we are as Africans. But I want to link that to something almost similar that happened in Senegal. Senegal's first president was a guy called Léopold Senghor. This guy was also a poet, highly intellectual, and he came up with something called negritude. Negritude was about blackness, you know, celebrating our essence as black people, being unapologetically black. So he did it through poetry. He did it through, you know, just celebrating African art. But the thinking behind it was that negritude, we as black people must intentionally and deliberately uphold and celebrate who we are. So you see there's a linkage between Chaditude and this negritude, even if there's different forms of execution. Now, why is that important for today's Africa? Because in today's Africa, we frown upon almost everything African. You know, it's possible that today, if we take a poll in this room, what we had for breakfast and what we had last night for dinner, it's possible that half of that food, if not more than half, is actually imported. You know, if it's white rice, it's imported. You know, there's African rice. One day I'll talk about that. There's actually there's African rice and Asian rice globally. So we mostly consume Asian rice, even though African rice is more nutritious. People don't even know where to buy it. That's how bad it is. But the point being that what informs these culinary decisions is both a subconscious and conscious choice and comparison that something African is lesser. If it's not African, it's of higher value. You know, there's that widespread feeling, even if people don't accept it. So we need that spirit of Chaditude and that spirit of negritude that Léopold Senghor came up with in Senegal to come back again.
To us.
You see, we need to celebrate our essence as Africans because when we do so, imagine those young people who die in the Mediterranean every time trying to go to France and Europe, you know, even though now there's a lot of economic hardship in those countries. It's partly because of that that psyche, that thinking that things must be a bit better out there.
And this is not good enough for us.
This is not good enough. So we've got to realize that the African, I will say it again, that we are the cradle of mankind. This is where it all began. Most of Africa lies on the equator, you know. Our climate is amazing. We don't have funny, crazy cold weather or funny, crazy hot weather. You know, we have it in moderation. Our land is amazing. So we have to go back to truly celebrating that, you see. Because when we don't do that, that's when we give France a free pass. Because this same guy, Léopold Senghor, despite starting that really good stuff, do you know Léopold Senghor in Senegal was actually known as l'homme de la France, which means that the man from France, roughly translated, l'homme de la France, the man of France. Because this guy was also unapologetically appreciative and celebratory of everything French. In fact, he then said that negritude, it's also about fusing Western culture and African culture. So I picked the good from him, but I have to point out that for him to earn that moniker, for him to earn that nickname, from his countrymen and women was because he really was this proudly French fellow at the same time. And that was very deliberate because France had what they called assimilation, away from the secrecy of Franafrique.
Yes.
They had a policy of assimilation, where a policy of assimilation in a nutshell was to simply turn Africans into French people, whether it's the language, whether it's the cuisine, name it, to just assimilate Africans, which is a policy that still stands to date. So this guy was, Leopold Senghor like epitomized that because he became even more French than the French people.
Yeah.
In 1983, he was actually the first African to be elected into Académie Française. This is the highest French body in charge of maintaining the purity of the French language and culture.
Hey.
But they elected him.
An African.
Yeah. So this business of having African leaders or Africans themselves becoming more American than Americans themselves, more French than the French people, more British than the British people, it has to stop.
Yes.
It has to stop completely because we ended up losing a bit of what could have been in Senegal because of that kind of confusion, that dilution that was exemplified in the president. Thankfully, now in Senegal, of course, we have these youngish leaders,
yes,
who are Ousmane Sonko and Diawaya. These guys are truly trying to make a difference. So we pray that they will pick the good of their country's history, be proud of who we are as Africans, but not be submissive to the French and the West.
Yes.
Then now we have like 3 former presidents before I talk about sovereignty, because that's where it's all at. When you move from this country, we're now going to come to Benin. Now, Benin is a very, very, very special country to you and all the African women, because Benin has a very illustrious history of the African woman doing what no other woman has ever done. You see, Benin, originally known as Dahomey, was the home of the all-female fighters, the female warriors that really were amazing in their bravery, in their tact, and in their strategy. Now, why I mention that is not just for that nostalgic, feeling.
And the romanticization.
Exactly. But do you know the reason that was never built upon was because of the French interference? When they came and began interfering with the local cultures, in the name of assimilation, interfering with the local realities, local governance structures upon which the all-female army was actually rooted, Benin then became a casualty, just like other former French colonies, because they also just became independent by name only, but their first president was totally nothing to write home about. There's totally nothing to write home about because he was also very subservient, very submissive. He refused to tap into the illustrious history of Benin. He totally refused to do that, and instead chose to tap into this Franafrique, into the French support. You see, now that is totally unacceptable. It's totally unacceptable because that means that Benin has now not been able to bequeath Africa that amazing history where the African woman is not just a perennial victim, but is actually a triumphant victor.
A conqueror.
Exactly, is an absolute conqueror. So we need to pick that from Benin, that one of the most dire consequences of the French interference, of the British interference, is because it seemed to just bring in a lot of constipation to the African governance systems, to the African cultural systems, so much so that to date, we're still not in touch with that. And you see, that's not acceptable at all.
Considering many generations might not even get to learn about it.
Yeah.
And they go and exploit that whole history and make a movie.
Exactly.
Anyways.
Yeah. Then now, there are a couple of things to really highlight before we finalize its sovereignty. there's a country called Central African Republic,
Yeah.
which to date is not even a functional state at all. Yet it's at the center of Africa, you know. It's very important symbolically, the Central African Republic.
Yeah.
Their first president was a guy called David Dacko. And this guy, like the others I've mentioned, was also a victim of the French machination, of the French manipulation. Now, a few years into his reign, the French did what they always do, or what they used to like doing. They realized, okay, this fellow is becoming unpopular. We don't need him no more. Let's take him out. So there was a successful coup d'etat. But the guy in charge of this coup d'etat was the infamous Emperor Bokassa. Emperor Bokassa, a guy who gave himself the title Empire. He went on to rule for 13 years. He became known as the Butcher of Bangui. Bangui is the capital of Central African Republic, because there was a time his army just killed students. Just killed students because their parents could not afford to purchase uniform from a factory that his family owned with his face. You know, he decreed that the new uniform in Central African Republic
must have his face.
Yeah, must have his face. So, of course, many parents resisted. Some couldn't afford, some just resisted. So he took it out on innocent children. More than 100 died. And this is a guy that was tolerated, enabled by France. For many times during his 13-year presidency, the French president, a guy called Valery, would actually come to do big game hunting in Central African Republic. They didn't care at all that he was butchering his own people, as long as you're serving their interests. Now, why this story is particularly crazy is after 13 years of his rule, the French went back to the same president, David Dacko, that they had overthrown, and now they got tired of Bokassa because he was becoming erratic. So now they used the same David Dacko to again overthrow Bokassa. So you see that turning Africa into a playground, completely turning Africa into a playground, because why should you take out one president, replace him with a butcher, a guy who is massacring his own people? Then the same president you took out again, you bring him back again. Those are the kinds of games that France has been playing in Africa. And those are the kinds of games that if you thought they are over, shock on you, because they're not over. They're just now happening in a much more cleverer manner.
Yes.
This is how they're now doing it.
The new way.
Yes. The new way, I call it Franafrique 2.0. Franafrique 2.0. Now they're doing it, not just behind the scenes, but very, very discreetly. You can barely, because they barely have their armies in Africa. In Djibouti, you have 1,500 French soldiers in the French naval base, but there are barely any other places where you'll find the French army.
Yes.
But how they are doing it at the moment in this Franafrique 2.0, actually Kenya comes into play there, because over the years since independence, France has been having the France-Africa Summit, either in France or in a former colony. It has been their way of keeping Franafrique alive at that formal level. Now, when they started becoming increasingly unpopular, they started having them more and more in France. Now, guess where that summit, the France-Africa Summit, will be held next year?
Kenya.
Yeah. It's going to be held in Kenya. Now that is Franafrique 2.0, because now France has realized that they have to spread their wings a bit. They have to go to the so-called Anglophone, because they are not wanted in Burkina Faso, they are not wanted in Niger.
They're losing popularity.
Yeah, they're losing popularity. So now they're trying to bring some Anglophone countries into the fold. So you will see a lot of heightened activity around that. Next year, when Emmanuel Macron comes to Kenya for that summit, it is very, very important for Kenyans, it is very, very important for Africans to speak out.
Key.
Yeah, do what Mokta Dada did. Speak out and say, we are not just going to be your new replacements. We refuse to have that. Even if he comes and forges ahead with that, let it be after Kenyans and Africans speak out saying that, first of all, you've got to correct all these injustices I've just been explaining, messing up entire countries, messing up entire generations. First of all, you've got to correct that. And if you don't correct that, if Macron will come to Kenya and address these issues, if he's going to allow the Kenyan people, the Kenyan youth, to ask him tough questions, then by all means, come on over. But if he's going to have scripted events that are going to portray an image of expanding their territory in Africa, then Africans must be able to say no to that, because it is simply a new form of Franafrique. And that's totally unacceptable.
And very sad.
Yeah.
And very sad.
Yeah.
But still on that, allow me to ask,
Yeah.
DJ, why is Kenya becoming a dumping site for so many things?
Yeah.
Why?
Again, always remember those three letters, CRE, corrupt ruling elite. Because you have the ruling elite, it's bad enough because the ruling elite are cut off from the people.
Yes.
In a class-based society, the ruling elite are the very, very top of the pyramid. And whatever happens to the rest of the country, they don't care. They are usually the owners of the country. But now when you add C,
Corrupt.
and it is now corrupt ruling elite, the best example of the corrupt ruling elite is Mobutu Sese Seko and his cronies. Because at his height, Mobutu Sese Seko had more money than his entire country. You know, the corrupt ruling elite, as I come to the Kenya question,
Yes.
when you're looking at a country like Cote d'Ivoire, and you're looking at their first president, Houphouët-Boigny, he was born in a town called Yamoussoukro. Yamoussoukro was the 5th largest town at that time, but just because it was his birthplace, it was made the capital. If you Google what's the capital of Cote d'Ivoire, it's not Abidjan, it's actually Yamoussoukro, because that's the attitude of the corrupt ruling elite. They treat the country like their property, and they treat the people like their subjects. Now, that should give you an answer to the Kenya question, where now you have a situation where the corrupt ruling elite in Kenya are treating you, Lynn, and everybody in this room and all Kenyans as their subjects. You know, you guys just work for them. You're just there. You're their subjects. You're not fellow citizens.
No.
They forget that the first article, the first sentence in Kenya's constitution says, "We the people."
With the people.
You see, sovereign power is vested in we the people. But they don't practice that. They don't believe that. They believe that the people are the subject. And that is completely unacceptable. So the reason Kenya is now becoming a dumping ground is because you have a ruling elite that is allowing it to happen for their own selfish purposes.
Yeah.
Just like those many of those presidents I've already talked about, who are actually selling their own country,
Yes.
you know, to the highest bidder, in this case France, so that they keep enriching themselves. You see, last time I shared how Maurice Yameogo built a palace for himself. Even the president of Benin, there are a couple of other presidents who also built palaces for themselves. So that is the attitude that has now been adopted here in Kenya, where it is about the people becoming subjects. The people stop being the holders of sovereign power. They stop being the ones who have donated this power to the president and all elected officials. So now they can do whatever they want. So the clarion call must go out that unless Kenyans themselves smell the coffee and wake up,
And speak.
and speak out, and when the time for voting comes, let it be revolution at the ballot. Let it be revolution at the ballot, as it happened in Senegal. If that doesn't happen, then Kenya will remain a dumping ground.
Yeah.
You see? And then the thing that is really critical, that I have to now emphasize this, because it is the final key in this scenario, is that singular word, sovereignty. Africans should pause and ask themselves, when we talk about sovereignty, what does it really mean? And do we really have it? We need to answer that question, because it actually holds the answer to how we now move forward.
Yes.
Because it has to be clear, how do we move forward? Now, sovereignty is about territorial integrity. It's about territorial integrity. In other words, for example, in the case of Kenya, is Kenya in control of every square inch in this country? Or are there enclaves that it's not in control? Is it in control of that airport restaurant? It's not. So that's not sovereignty.
Yes.
Because there has to be territorial integrity. There has to be political independence. As you have seen, in the case of most of Francophone Africa, there was zero political independence.
Yes.
Zero. When the great Thomas Sankara rose up and tried to secure political independence, they simply said, hey, in the Franafrique machinations and dealings, they had to replace him with Blaise Compaoré, like they had to replace Sylvanus Olympio in Togo and many other truly transformative leaders. Now, political independence simply means that the presidency is answerable to the people.
Good.
And not the globalists, not IMF, not World Bank. In the case of Kenya, every honest Kenyan should ask themselves, is the president really answerable to me as a Kenyan? Or is the president much more answerable to other foreign machinations? When you look at RSF in Nairobi, when you look at a lot of these IMF World Bank policies, you can start piecing together.
Yes.
So sovereignty means that territorial integrity. If you don't have it, you're not sovereign. Which is why Ibrahim Traoré is not in control of half of Burkina Faso, because the jihadists are in control of that.
Yes.
And the international community, tragically including Africa, is allowing that status quo to continue. Which means that as we speak, Ibrahim Traoré and Burkina Faso do not have sovereignty that they deserve as a country. They deserve as a people, because they don't have that territorial integrity. Then the vast majority of the 54 heads of state in Africa also do not have political independence, because they are not answerable to their people. So Africans must rise up. Ask yourself, is my president engendering, enabling, nurturing political independence or not? If the answer is no, that man has no business being your president.
Exactly.
You see?
Exactly.
And then there's a third bit of sovereignty. This is internal sovereignty. Internal sovereignty, because you have cases where internally there's still no sovereignty, because there's no control, like in the case of Burkina Faso. It is linked with territorial integrity. So you cannot have internal sovereignty if you're not in control of what is happening within your country. By the way, even when the leaders lose the people, when the leaders are no longer the people, the sovereignty of that country has now been compromised, because the state can no longer function effectively.
Good.
Then there's also external sovereignty, which is linked to external intervention. Anytime a foreign nation must come into your country to intervene, you're not sovereign at all. So when we have all these cases of foreign armies on African soil, in the name of bases, military bases, including Kenya, including Djibouti, we're not sovereign at all.
And conservancies.
Yeah, exactly. What kind of sovereignty is that?
None.
You see, like that speaks to the fact that the internal sovereignty is not there, because we're not in control of certain sections of the country. You see? Then now comes the big one. You see, the African Union and France is having the last laugh. For now, France has outwitted us a little bit, but we're going to bounce back. Let me explain. Djibouti, awesome country, previously known as French Somalia. If you want to see how tight they are with France. Previously, before it was called Djibouti, it was just French Somalia. You see, for 93 years, France colonized Djibouti. 93 good years. France colonized Djibouti. They got independence. Their first president was called Aptido. When he passed on, his nephew took over, and his nephew is now the current president. Now, the guy who was foreign affairs minister in Djibouti from the early 2000s to this year is the new chairman of the Africa Union. Of course, Raila Odinga was the worst evil in that scenario, because for Raila Odinga, it was about Kenyan politics playing out on the regional stage. So he was not going to be any better. Actually, I think he would have been worse.
And securing the bag.
Exactly. But now you have to connect the dots here.
Yes.
Because just the fact that this AU chairman was better than Odinga doesn't mean that he was the right fit for Africa.
Really?
Because of the French, it was never going to be Odinga. But if you're forced with a choice between the devil and Satan,
yes,
maybe you can say that I don't want neither of those.
Good.
Maybe you can find a third choice. So Africa was faced with that choice. The reason I'm very particular on that is France's fingerprints in the African Union are now bigger than ever before. So they are laughing. I guarantee you, behind the scenes, Macron and his cronies are just laughing and saying, you guys kicked us out of Burkina Faso, you kicked us out of Niger, kicked us out of these other countries.
Look at us now.
Yeah, because their fingerprints in the African Union are stronger than ever before. Because Djibouti is a creature of France. There is no Djibouti without France. To date, Djibouti has the largest French military base in Africa. 1,500 soldiers, French soldiers in Djibouti. Those countries are Siamese twins, but in a manner that only benefits France mostly. Of course, Djibouti might argue that, oh, we are secure and what have you. But I just need people to understand that Djibouti is almost an extension of France here in Africa. Yes, it is an independent country, but it is so tied, so wedded to France that you cannot extricate France from Djibouti. Now, when you have the guy who was in charge of foreign policy in Djibouti for more than 20 years, the longest serving foreign affairs minister in Djibouti, meaning that this guy is part of this Franco-Djibouti dance, he's deep in there. When you now have him at the helm, when I was talking to somebody from Burkina Faso about 2 weeks ago, I still remember the look of utter sadness and dejection in his face when I asked him the question, do you think the African Union will help you? And he said in its current formation, he doubts it will. And he also shared this view that I'm sharing now, that it is now up to the new AUC chairman to prove us wrong. But Africans have to wake up to the reality that the African Union in itself is already compromised. Now, when you have the African Union at this stage, led by somebody whose foreign policy is deeply steeped in France, he has to prove us wrong.
Yes.
I'm challenging him to prove us wrong. Even if what I'm saying is completely erroneous, let him prove us wrong. And one sure way of proving us wrong is for the African Union to step up and play a proactive role in Burkina Faso.
Why is anyone not doing that?
Simply because of these global factors.
Yeah.
You see, it is, number one, extremely difficult to kick out jihadists anywhere.
Yes.
Because it's not normal warfare. It takes a lot of coordination,
Yeah.
and it takes a lot of soft power. Now, France tried to do that before they were kicked out. For many years, they were unable to do it. The same way America was unable to kick out the Taliban in Afghanistan. Because some of this warfare, you cannot defeat it using raw military power. I believe the people of Burkina Faso know and believe that it's going to take a lot of concerted effort, a lot of soft power to kick out the jihadists, a combination of the soft power and the hard power. Now, it costs money to do that. It costs effort. African presidents are at the moment lazy because they feel like the Sahel, what is there to gain from the Sahel?
None of their business.
It doesn't concern us. So that is the reason they are not then preoccupied with that. But we're calling on the African Union. We're calling on the new AUC chairman. We still hope that you can deliver. We still hope that you can prove us wrong. So it is up to the African Union. It is up to him to actually rise and now say the people of Burkina Faso deserve better. if he does that, then I'll be the first person to say, thank you very much for proving us wrong. But if he doesn't do that, it's going to solidify this belief that France is still in the shadows in an even stronger way.
Yes.
But most critically, finally, it is up to the person in the mirror. It is really, really, really up to the African in the mirror. And I mean the 1.3, 1.4 billion Africans.
Yeah.
It is we, the people of Africa, who have to say that business as usual cannot remain. We are the ones who have to transform Africa, either by revolution, through the ballot box, or otherwise. It has to be that. If the people of Africa don't do that, the corrupt ruling elite will continue treating us as subjects, will continue exploiting us, will continue colluding with France, just like those presidents used to do, those that I mentioned earlier, from David Dacko to Emperor Bokassa. The current crop of African leaders who are very corrupt will continue colluding with France, with America, with Britain, with the West, with China.
Until Africa is over.
So we cannot afford that. Yeah.
Great. And thank you for connecting the dot. Man, I think the AUC chairman was so highly celebrated. People missed out this connection right here. People actually missed that.
Yeah. Let people remember exactly what I'm saying. You don't have to choose between the devil and Satan because they're one and the same thing.
Yes.
It is up to the people to say, you are one and the same thing. I don't have to choose between you. I'm going to go for somebody else, you see. And it's the same choice that people must have when Kenya has elections in 2027, when Uganda has elections, when Tanzania has elections, across Africa during elections, Africans should stop choosing between the devil and Satan. Africans should start choosing truly transformative leaders who are often the third option because they don't have the corrupt money that would catapult them to the top.
Resources. Yes.
So this is in no way a support of Raila Odinga that he should have been the chairman.
Yeah.
Again, let me be very clear. This guy is better than Raila Odinga, but people did not have to choose between the devil and
the
Satan.
Yeah. Powerful. Huh? Wow, we keep learning. Honestly, even me and my German machine, I would not have made I would not have made that connection. And that is why, these conversations are very important. You've broken it down so well from key number 1 all the way to key number 5. And I hope that's what people take home. Even as I envisioned us having this conversation, I still would not have imagined you being able to connect this the way you've done. Every key with its own examples, the solutions. Because again, even as much as we keep telling these stories, we have to be solution-based.
Exactly.
Where do we go from here?
Exactly.
What do we do next?
Exactly.
Exactly. How do we use our voice? Now I know a lot of people who are watching are ready for the French president when he comes to Kenya.
Yes.
I know people now will start digging and asking the right questions.
Exactly.
Personally, I think I'm just frustrated that Kenya is becoming a dumping ground for so many global things that don't help us as Kenyans.
Exactly.
But what you've just said, whose interests are you serving?
Exactly.
Are you serving the interests of the people or the interests of the globalists? So I don't know. I don't know, DJ. But thank you so much. I honestly don't want to let you go. That is always the part. As you speak, I have so many ideas. I want to venture into so many different topics, but I always know every topic can have its day. But even as we wind up, how does that parting shot look like? And what are 2 other books that you can recommend for our audience today?
Great. First of all, for the books, I still insist that Africans must learn from their history. There's a book by Steve Biko called I Write What I Want. It's a very, very important book because it's in Steve Biko's own words. He was in his late 20s, early 30s before they took him out. So it's very important to begin understanding people like Steve Biko, the Black consciousness movement that he started. We need that to be replicated in today's Africa because that term Black consciousness is extremely important. Black consciousness, in a wider context, simply means that the African awakening, being fully awake and realizing that I can make a difference.
Yeah.
You know, I am not lesser. I can truly make a difference. Black consciousness means connecting, you know, connecting as Africans, both in the motherland and in the diaspora.
Yes.
So when people read I Write What I Like by Steve Biko, hopefully it begins to trigger something that, am I conscious as a Black person? Is Black consciousness alive and kicking in me? Because if it's not, then we've got to continue walking this journey together.
Yes.
You know, it's really important. And then everything that I've shared here, much as I may not have connected the dots like I have here, but the stories of all these leaders is in my book. Again, I urge people to go and read my book, Wisdom Whispers. It's called Savannah Footprints, because you're going to be able to read these stories in greater detail.
Yes.
And I'm also now working on another book. In 3 months it will be ready, that expounds much more on what next for today's Africa in very practical terms. So I urge people to go and look at those two books. That one for Steve Biko, you as a Black person or you as a friend of Africa, it's going to trigger this Black consciousness in you. And then the second one, take a deep dive into the history of our leaders, not just because you love history, because you may not love it as I do, but to learn the lessons for today, for today's Africa. And because the governance and leadership in today's Africa affects you individually. When you paid almost 200 shillings per liter for fuel, it's because of governance. You know, things don't have to be that way. So once people realize that good governance means a good life for me and bad governance means a bad life for me, they will awaken much more politically. You know, the Black consciousness will be nurtured much more, so that we're not saying now you go and run for office, but we're saying use your power, because you, as part of with the power, an African who is part of that is extremely powerful. Yeah, so it's time for us to use our power in that sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is your book in Nuria? Is it in bookstores or is it in Amazon? How can people get a copy?
Yeah, it's gonna be in Kenya physically in 3 months' time.
Beautiful.
But for now, everybody can buy it in Amazon.
Okay.
Either the soft copy or the hard copy.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Man, as always, I get to learn a lot every time I have a conversation with you. Now I won't proudly say German. You know, now I live in, maybe I'll be the first one to manufacture an African car here, you know, assemble it here. But I love these conversations that we are having as Africans. I love the feedback that we are also getting from people out there. And for me, I say it's never the right time or the wrong time for you to learn something. You decide what you want with your life, and the time is now. Because sometimes you want to do these things when you think this is the perfect time for me to do it. But you will feel it in your soul. This awakening, unfortunately, it cannot be forced onto you. It's something you really have to feel. And I have loved your view on Black consciousness, you know. What am I feeling? Who am I? Sovereignty. When you say sovereignty, what does that mean? Etc. etc. So shukran sana. So before I let you go, our producer AJ has a question. We've seen the Alliance Francaise. We've seen these projects in Kenya. I think it's just down there. So what exactly does France want to achieve with having some of these projects across Africa? Are they achieving, or are they trying? What exactly are they doing to Africans mind-wise, or is it just an innocent project that is out there culturally?
Okay, this is one thing we have to say to France. Emmanuel Macron, your time is up. Your time is up completely. Arrête, stop. Now, when I use your language to speak to you, I am not putting you on a pedestal, but I'm just being smart. For that reason, Africans who speak English need to try at their best to learn French. And Africans who speak French need to do their best to learn English. Even better, Africans should do what Julius Malema, somebody that I appreciate, he has very clearly said that maybe Africa should consider using Swahili as a language of Africa. I know the Yoruba people will say that, oh, but in West Africa we speak Yoruba, not Swahili. But the point we're making is this. If we cannot communicate linguistically, we're already divided. So it's very, very important. In fact, as we teach about Modibo Keita, as we teach about Samori Touré in our African schools across the continent, we also need to institute multi-languages as mandatory so that the rising generation of Africans can finally be able to speak to each other. Whether they'll speak to each other in French, English, Swahili, or Yoruba, we cannot wish that away. Now, France is trying to use this language thing and soft power to spread the virus across Africa. Granted, there's a bit of that is good because Africans do not have a problem with the French people themselves, the vast majority of French people. The same way we don't have a problem with the vast majority of Americans. We have a problem with the corrupt ruling elite in France. We have a problem with the corrupt system in France that is now trying to use soft power through bodies like Alliance Française to actually begin creating an image of France as a very, very harmless creature. Mm-hmm. On its own, Alliance Française as a place is not a bad place to be. I myself, I have interacted a lot with Alliance Française, not just in Kenya, but outside. So it is a good space. In fact, I urge people to actually be able to use some of these platforms and weapons that are at heart, they may be seeking to mess up the African. For example, the social media platforms that we use are not owned by Africans. A lot of times they are extremely unfair, extremely unjust to Africans. The bodies like TikTok and a few others do not even pay African creators, but they have the creator fund in the US. So that's unacceptable, that's exploitative, but it does not mean that you should not use these platforms. By all means, use these platforms as long as you know what you're doing. So in the same way, we've got to be able to interact with the French language in a manner that emboldens and empowers Pan-Africanism. We also have to be vigilant and alive to the fact that France is trying to do what America did with Hollywood. The reason America is thought of as the very best of the best, as a kind of heaven on earth, is partly because of Hollywood. Even Saddam Hussein himself, when he was found in the bunker, when they captured him, he had US dollars with him. You would think that of all people, Saddam Hussein would not interact with anything American. Mm-hmm. But it is because of the power of Hollywood. Because Hollywood has really been able to tap into this soft power and to propagate soft power of America across the world. Mm-hmm. So similarly, like your question alludes to, France is trying to use some of these cultural initiatives mm-hmm. to begin showing the other side of France so that a new generation of Africans can look at France as a very, very innocent entity and not the evil entity that it is. Mm-hmm. So yes, they're having a measure of success in that. However, things are not as rosy as they think because now Africans are much more empowered and awakened. So Africans are able to go to Alliance Française to learn French as they should. Yeah. They're able to even go for cultural exchange visits as they should if they have the opportunity, because this world belongs to all of us. Mm-hmm. So Africans have a right to go wherever they want to go to. Yeah. But we need to do so with the absolute vigilance that we cannot allow what happened through the Hollywood soft power propagation globally to recur or to happen again with France. If we are vigilant enough, we are going to be able to make the most of such platforms in a manner that is useful to us. Good. Either our careers or even our own consciousness. But as we do so, we have to realize that we cannot allow them to hoodwink us the way Hollywood did. Because the moment we do that, then we're in double trouble.
Yes.
But I am confident that the African is awakening, and that will not happen.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. EJ, you're good? All right. So I appreciate you once again for coming and
pleasure.
having this conversation
My
with me.
pleasure,
And I can't wait to see what the next conversation
Yes.
after here will be. I
Yes.
imagine us having a series of conversations,
Yes,
couple of
yes.
episodes together.
Yes.
And for us, it's to always let you know that LNN
Yes.
is home.
Yes.
Anytime you want to come and speak, feel free.
Yes,
Anytime
great.
you are launching something, let us know.
Great,
And we will
great.
definitely partner
Thank you
in
so
some
much.
of these
Yeah.
projects. And to you guys at home, I hope we have learned where today is what I think today we have had a deeper one, and I hope we have learned what we needed to learn. We are learning, we are relearning. Having a German machine is not a flex. If you're an African, tafadhali. I love such challenges, and I love that this helps us, think deeper. Because when we say Africa is ours and Africa is our business, what do we mean? If we cannot speak out, if we cannot, if you cannot call out some of the ills, some of the vices that are happening in this continent, then don't say Africa is your business. It should be your business, and you should be able to speak out, and you should be able to do what's right. What's right? Actually, just do what's right. Let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know what your take home has been. Connect with DJ. His socials are on the screen right now, and we will be putting a link, an Amazon link, to where you can be able to order his book. My name is Lynn Ngugi. See you guys. Bye-bye.